Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, June 17th, 2015, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another crazy weekend. At the moment, unfortunately, our phones aren't open. We're having a little bit of a technical glitch. I'm assured that the phone lines will be open at some point in the immediate future, so hold off on your phone calls until then, and I've got plenty to talk about. Now, in our third hour today, we're scheduled to have Alex Newman. He's co-author of this book, The Crimes of Educators, talking about how our educational system has been warped away from education towards indoctrination and how it is really shortchanging our children's future in the quest to create a generation of obedient workers who will believe as they're told to believe by the government, because the government's getting really sick and tired of all of us pesky people who can think for ourselves and realize that things like Saddam's nuclear weapons and human-caused global warming are just a lot of nonsense. And they're just tired of having to deal with that. They can't run the country if they can't lie to you with impunity, which of course is not the way the country is supposed to be run, but that's what they think. Now, things are heating up over toward Russia. Moscow has issued a warning to the United States to stop storing offensive weapons near the Russian border. And just to put this in context, okay, what would happen, do you think, if Russia started storing offensive weapons in, for example, Mexico, or hypothetically nuclear missiles in Cuba? The U.S. would not react very well to that. So Russia's concerns over the NATO-U.S. buildup are certainly legitimate and valid. But NATO is out there saying Russia's the problem, that Moscow's engaged in saber-rattling because they're complaining about all these offensive weapons that the U.S. and NATO are putting in there to counter Russian aggression. So they're still staying loyal to the propaganda agenda, even though they're looking actually kind of silly right about now. And they're not really fooling anybody about who is the aggressor here. And over at Global Research, they have an article saying U.S. may position for a war against Russia. And they are scratching their heads and saying, this is really not a good idea. But they go through the history, basically, of the fall of the Soviet Union, the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, and everybody said, okay, great, we don't have to worry about a war with Russia, but then the U.S. and NATO have been expanding right up to the borders of Russia, picking off country after country for covert overthrow and co-opting by puppet rulers, most recently Ukraine. And they were sort of hoping nobody would notice, but obviously with the debacle in Ukraine, yeah, we're noticing that. America is the threat, not Russia. Russia has every right to be concerned. Now, here in the U.S., our unemployment problem may be severe, but not in the military-industrial complex. In fact, U.S. defense industries have increased the workforce by 20% at a facility that handles tests for submarine nuclear missiles, the Trident II. They're adding jobs there. They're starting to test them more and more. These are the missiles that can wipe out 8 cities in a single blow. Or at least that's the claim coming from the defense contractor sales brochure. But there's something you all need to keep in mind. And there's an article over at Pravda which is reinforcing something I've been saying for months. Russia's new nuclear missile warheads are able to evade the U.S. missile defense system. The U.S. ballistic missile defense system is built around a doctrine of an incoming threat that follows a predictable ballistic arc, so that you know where it's going to be some seconds ahead of where it is right now. And all Russia had to do was to make their warheads maneuverable. They don't follow a predictable path. They corkscrew, they weave, they go up and down. And it completely obsoletes our entire ballistic missile defense system, including that giant space-based radar we've got down here in Pearl Harbor, $2.5 billion. And they're admitting it really doesn't work the way it's supposed to, huge gaps in its coverage. And now China, of course, has started deploying their hypersonic transatmospheric vehicle, which is also maneuverable and able to deliver nuclear warheads. The U.S. military-industrial complex has poured billions and billions, possibly trillions of dollars into a missile defense system that can't actually work. It was very easy and inexpensive to evade, but it was profitable, so we're going to keep on pouring more money into that. Now, Russia is going to extend their food ban on the European Union in response to the fact that the U.S.-sponsored sanctions are continuing and increasing. And so far, remember, these sanctions have harmed Europe and the United States and the rest of the world far more than they've harmed Russia's economy. Russia's economy took a dip, then they adjusted, starting doing business with the rest of the world, and they're okay. So here we have a typical U.S. government policy that isn't working, is backflashing, causing more harm than good to our allies. So, of course, yes, let's keep on doing more of the same thing because we have a president and a government that is always right no matter how wrong they are. Now, down in Israel, they are really in a panic over the forthcoming United Nations report on the war crimes that were committed in Gaza last summer. And it turns out that once again, Israel blocked the United Nations Human Rights Envoy from entering Gaza. And basically saying, we can't allow this visit because he is part of this anti-Israel mandate. We're only going to allow people in who will see things from our point of view. And Israel has a right to make itself heard. Well, we heard you, Israel, loud and clear last summer. And we saw what you were doing. And this idea that you should be the only party allowed to comment on what happened is absurd. Now, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, proving that she is still loyal to Netanyahu, assured Congress that Washington is committed to fighting the delegitimization of Israel. Don't you wish our government was a little more concerned about our problems here in the U.S.? I certainly do. I mean, the fact is, Israel's actions are what delegitimize it. This is like Samantha Power says, we're committed to putting out fire in a house where there's an arsonist living. And as soon as you put out one flame, they light another one. That's kind of a fool's errand, but they're going to keep on doing it because Israel must be supported and Palestine must be blocked. Or Israel will tell the world who really did 9/11, and it will be worse for the U.S. than it will be for Israel here. Now then, a little side note. Last summer, one of the crimes that Israel committed was the use of white phosphorus on residential areas in Gaza. This is a war crime. White phosphorus is illegal under international treaty as an offensive weapon against residential areas. It sets fires. If it gets on your skin, it just keeps on burning as it digs into you. It turns out Israel got that white phosphorus from the United States of America, who buys it from Monsanto. Another reason to be sort of wondering exactly what this company is all about. Alrighty, let's see. Another article out here over at Desert Peace. Open your eyes. Israel is full of excrement, and they're talking about this animated cartoon the foreign ministry in Israel put out to basically bash Western media as being ignorant fools. And as I pointed out the other day, if they're using cartoons, it's because they think we're all children. Turns out I'm not alone in my anger and ire about that. More when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Our phones, unfortunately, are still not working, and I think we ought to get some Dixie cups and wax string. Well, look at the bright side. The NSA isn't going to be listening into what you have to say. Yeah, if you can't call in here. Anyway, so we're talking about this ridiculous cartoon Israel's foreign ministry put out. And it was insulting because, frankly, they are treating us like they think we're all children, that we're going to be absolutely convinced by this cartoon that Western journalists reporting on last summer's attack on Gaza were just complete idiots who didn't realize that Hamas are terrorists and all the rest of that stuff. And not too surprisingly, Western journalists have come out swinging, just absolutely appalled at the dishonesty in this cartoon, and again, the displayed attitude that we are all children who can be bamboozled by a little tiny cartoon. And they are a little upset, and they have every right to be. They have every right to be. And I guess this is Israel's attitude about the whole world, that, you know, they're the chosen ones and everybody else are just dumb cattle or children because they resort to cartoons a lot. Remember Netanyahu at the United Nations, his little cartoon bomb? Iran is dangerous. See, they're up to my red line. And it really is insulting. Now, apparently there is a major offensive going on in the Golan by the Syrian so-called rebels. We know the rebels are actually hired mercenaries, and they're supported by the U.S. and by Israel. But they've launched this offensive against one of the Assad military bases in the Quneitra province. So they're out there still trying to get that situation going. Israel is still out there claiming that they want to protect the Druze in the Golan by annexing part of Syria to create a safety buffer zone. And almost as soon as they announced that, some of these hired mercenaries surrounded this Druze village. Oh my goodness, they're under threat. See, we have to annex part of Syria and make a little nature preserve for the Druze. And we know that Israel doesn't care about the Druze any more than they care about the Palestinians. This is just another excuse to grab land they don't own and do things with it. Now, there's a story here over at Electronic Intifada where, for the second time, Israel authorities have demolished a Palestinian home in the Galilee village of Kufr Khana. The home belongs to Tariq al-Khatib, who rebuilt his home after Israeli bulldozers first knocked it down last April. And following the reconstruction, Israel's Interior Ministry issued another demolition order under the pretext of unauthorized construction, which is their excuse when they go in and knock down Palestinian homes. Now, there's something you all need to keep in mind here. Israel is out there screaming, boycott, divestment, sanctions is bad. You can't boycott Israel. Boycotts are evil, which is, of course, not what they were saying back when they organized a global boycott against Germany in 1933. But Israel boycotts the Palestinians every single day by denying them employment, denying them building permits. It is written into Israeli law. Palestinians are not allowed to work in the illegal settlements. The settlements have to hire Jewish workers. That is effectively a boycott. But with so much else that we see coming from Israel, it's good when they do it, bad when everybody else does it. And apparently Netanyahu is getting really, really desperate about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Because yesterday he was out there screaming that the people who support BDS were the people who were behind 9/11. Tried to link it, saying that everybody who's behind the boycott movement, they're part of the terrorist network that did 9/11. Well, he didn't get a lot of traction with that because it is absurd on the face of it. Now, Netanyahu is equating the BDS movement to Nazi Germany because it's defaming the Jewish people. It is the behavior of the people that defames them. Nobody just gets up one day and says, I'm going to start calling this group bad names for no reason at all. And so now Netanyahu is saying, if you support boycott, divestment, and sanction, then you're all Nazis. Now, over at the Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio, just on the 10th and 11th, just last week, they had a conference titled Seeking Peace in the Holy Land. Among the speakers were staunch supporters of Israel, including former U.S. Ambassador in Tel Aviv, Daniel Kurtzer, Lara Friedman of the Zionist group Americans for Peace Now, and Warren Clark, director of the Churches for Middle East Peace. They were supposed to have one Palestinian representative, Mubarak Awad, the Palestinian founder of Nonviolence International. He's out there saying we shouldn't resort to violence. He's pro-peace. And he was disinvited from the conference under pressure from local Jewish groups. You know, because we're going to talk about peace between Israel and Palestine, we can't have a Palestinian there. They're just going to confuse things and muddy up the water talking about the Palestinian perspective. And it's not like this guy was out there saying, go out, make war, and commit acts of terror. He's calling for nonviolence. But he's Palestinian. We can't have a Palestinian talking about peace in Palestine. Just doesn't make any sense at all. Here in the United States of America, they're getting ready to look at the grant program, security grant program, from the Senate Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee. Every year they put out all this money that is supposed to go for boosting security here in the United States of America. Jewish organizations get a disproportionate amount of the money. They're taking tax money away from every single American and preferentially giving it to Jewish schools and various other institutions. And that Jewish earmark, and that is what they themselves call it, is going to be doubled next year. Certainly that's a violation of the apportionment clause, isn't it? To take money away from all Americans and spend it only on this one favored group. Now over in Iraq, everyone's talking about the advisors, the trainers. We've been through this before in Vietnam. Those first troops into Vietnam, they're advisors. They're there to train the soldiers. Well, here's something you need to keep in mind. You can train soldiers all you want, but if they are not motivated, you're going to lose. That's what happened in Vietnam. That's what's going on in Iraq. All these very expensively trained Iraqi troops are dropping their weapons and running because they are not motivated to murder their own people on behalf of a government on the other side of the planet. So they're trying to use euphemisms like advisors and so forth to get a new war in Iraq going. But it's not working, and it's not going to work. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I've commented many times before that part of the long-range strategic goal for both the United States and Israel in the Middle East is to redraw the map and take the large regional powers like Iraq and Iran and break them into little tiny pieces that are going to be easier to bully and push around. And we are beginning to see the machinations for that, because there's this article over at ekurd.net where they're talking about Anwar Eshki. He's a former consultant of the Saudi prince and ambassador in the United States, and he's basically laying out a plan to establish Great Kurdistan. They're going to create a whole new nation by carving off pieces of Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. And it sounds great. The Kurds will have their own place. And this is all about the balkanization of Iran and Iraq. Nothing to do with the Kurds. The Kurds are the excuse, just like the Druze are the excuse for Israel to take more of Syria. And let's be honest, Lincoln used the issue of slavery over what was really a war about maintaining the unity of the nation, the empire, as it were, in the face of a federal government which even back then was struggling to break free of its constitutional limits here. Over in Yemen, UNICEF is reporting 279 children have been killed in the last 10 weeks of violence in Yemen. The numbers are trending up as Saudi Arabia continues to bomb civilian infrastructure like schools. This is not about fighting against Houthi rebels. This is punishing the people of Yemen for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler. Now, over at Kaspersky, they've come out with another statement saying that analysis of the malware that attacked their computers shortly after Kaspersky announced that the malware had attacked the hotels in Iran where the negotiators for the P5+1 were staying, bears marked similarities to Stuxnet, which we know was originally a malware developed jointly by the United States and Israel to try and sabotage Iran's civilian nuclear power infrastructure. And Stuxnet broke into the wild, caused all kinds of economic damage all across Asia, was known to have infected computers surrounding the Fukushima nuclear power station, And it is not entirely impossible that the reason so many of Fukushima's safety systems did not work is because they are using the exact same Siemens industrial controllers Stuxnet was designed to interfere with. Now, back in March of this year, the Wall Street Journal revealed that senior White House officials knew Israel was spying on the P5+1 so that Netanyahu could find inside information about the negotiations to help build a case against the deal for his whores in the United States Congress. I love it how every time Israel gets caught in another spy scandal, they'll stand up and say, Israel does not spy on the United States, and anybody who says we do is a Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies. Now, over in Pakistan, their government has ordered the police to shut down the offices of the Save the Children charity. It's ordering all of Save the Children's foreign employees to leave Pakistan within 2 weeks. They're persona non grata because they've been caught engaging in espionage. And this isn't the first time. Save the Children has been linked to CIA and was caught spying in other countries, and it's been given the old heave-ho. This is starting to reek of the Peace Corps. Remember back during the Kennedy years, the Peace Corps, we're going to have all these volunteers going into other countries to do really good things and bring them our way of life. And it turned out it was a CIA front organization to cover for spying. It looks like Save the Children's more of the same thing. There was a John Candy, Tom Hanks movie called Volunteers that actually had that in the storyline. They volunteered for the Peace Corps, and they found out they were actually part of a covert effort to overthrow somebody's government and put in puppet rulers. So even Hollywood occasionally will dance sort of kind of close to the truth about what's been going on here. Cyprus is sending humanitarian aid to eastern Ukraine, or at least they're going to try. It's been shipped to Novorossiysk seaport in Russia, from where it will be delivered to Donetsk by trucks of the Russian Ministry for Emergencies. And hopefully that will be helping them out. And it's kind of relaxing, or reassuring, I should say, that we're not seeing the interdiction of humanitarian supplies in Ukraine that we are seeing in Yemen. They are not allowing any aid to get in there. No fresh water, no food, no medical supplies. The Yemen people are being punished by Saudi Arabia acting as a proxy for U.S. interests. And by the way, apparently the new king is not well liked. There's a group within Saudi Arabia has declared war against Riyadh. I don't think they'll last too long, but it does show that everybody's at the breaking point. Now, there's an organization over in Great Britain that is getting their support together to bring a lawsuit against the BBC, which stands for Brits Buggering Children. But it's not about the Jimmy Savile scandal or anything like that. It goes back to that fact that BBC on 9/11 reported on the collapse of World Trade Center Building Number 7 26 minutes before it actually happened. And this group is going to sue the BBC under the UK Terrorism Act of 2000, Section 15, Part 3. Basically, if you are providing any kind of support for an act of terror, and obviously if BBC knew something that was going to happen to Building 7 before it actually did, and they're refusing to talk about it, they are in violation of the UK Terrorism Act. And they go on to state about all the programs BBC has produced to try and sell the official story. You know, oh yeah, you should believe what we tell. Forget all about that videotape where we threw away the original, we can't comment on it. And frankly, I'm still annoyed that they let the Top Gear presenters go. So, not that that has anything to do with this. All right, let's talk about the economy a little bit. As you know, the Federal Reserve had their little confab earlier today, came out with their latest report. They are not raising rates right now, which goosed the stock market back into the green. It had been down in the red middle of the day. Yellen is out there with this kind of rambling speech about how we're not going to be talking about rate hikes in any one instance. We have to focus on this very long process of getting the economy going again, and we'll raise rates sometime next year. No, they won't. They're stuck. They can't raise rates without collapsing the U.S. economy, because right now the entire financial system is being propped up by all this instantly created zero-interest cash pouring out of the Fed into Wall Street so that they can go on buying bonds and stocks and make it look like there's healthy economic activity in a country which doesn't really have a healthy economy. We don't have the manufacturing. We don't have agricultural produce. It's all a giant fraud to try and make you think the economy is in recovery. It is not. It has not been. More about the economy when we come back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. The phones are still down. I'm sorry about that. We're working on the problem. Apparently, it's an issue with the telephone company. And I'm sure our tech operator is on the phone screaming at them, dig up Alexander, get him over there and fix the thing. We're talking about the economy over here. And we are seeing reports, China's economy is in trouble because while they are a manufacturing powerhouse and an agricultural producer, it doesn't work if they can't sell their product to somebody. And China has been exporting huge amounts of products both to the United States and to Europe. And as the U.S. and Europe sink into this debt slavery situation where there isn't enough money out there to pay bills, let alone go shopping, China's exports are collapsing. Shanghai's containerized freight index is just pegging at the bottom. And this is one of the downsides of globalism. You know, it all works if everything's kept in balance and harmony, but nobody was really paying attention to that. And all those American retailers and manufacturers who said, we don't need to make our own products, we'll just buy it from China. And it worked for a while, but it was never going to work in the long run. Because here in the United States of America, if you're in manufacturing, retail, any of those areas, your employees are also your customers. When you start laying off your workers to buy cheaper goods from China, those workers stop going to the shopping malls. And it doesn't matter how cheap the products are if nobody has the money to buy. Even Walmart's in trouble right now. So, let's talk about Greece. Things are not good over there. Latest estimates are that Greece has less than 2 weeks left before there's going to be a major event. Collapse, default, leaving the Eurozone. The situation is accelerating. The Greek Debt Committee, which is the official government body trying to resolve all of this, has just declared all debt to the Troika to be illegal, illegitimate, and odious. That last word has a specific meaning in international law. And remember, at least half of Greece's debt problem was created out of thin air by Goldman Sachs and Papandreou, who were using these currency swaps to try and conceal the true scale of Greece's debt problem, and in the process they doubled it. So we're already hearing these indications that Greece is just going to walk away from it. In fact, there's a story over an Investment Watch blog. Tsipras has told other leaders of the Syriza party that Greece is not going to pay the IMF unless the IMF agrees to Greece's conditions. Tsipras is standing firm on this. And by the way, let's be very honest. All of this austerity that Greece has suffered hasn't actually fixed the problem. It's made the money junkies richer. It's made the Greek people poorer, increased the hardship on them. It hasn't changed the reality that Greece is still a debt slave to the money junkies. Austerity does not work. It's just another variation of the theme of you must make do with less so we can have more. And people are getting sick and tired of that. In fact, there's a interesting little story down here. European Central Bank press release this Wednesday could end extortion racket over Greece. They're basically saying everywhere in the European Union there is a growing popular sentiment of enough. They are sick and tired of debt-based currency. They're sick and tired of private central banking. They know it is a scam and a fraud. It's a system of tyranny and enslavement. They're fed up. Back in Greece, deposits are down to 2004 levels. They're still trying to claim there are no bank runs going on. It's just very slow. But yeah, and let's be honest, with all this talk about bail-ins and the rest of it, you should not have any more money in the bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations. And more people are doing that, which is why they've been screaming about, we've got to ban cash. All the money should be in the banks and never allowed out of the banks. Gives them more liquidity to play with, and it obviously makes bank runs impossible. You can't go to the bank and say, give me my money. They'll just say, stick in your card and send it someplace else. We still get to play with it. And the rest of the Eurozone is not really prepared for what could happen. They've all been clinging to this dream that somehow Greece will be brought back into the fold and go on servicing the unpayable debt. And if it goes the other way, they're not ready for it. We already are seeing in Greece, 7 cities have created and are using their own local currencies. This is something we saw in the Confederacy during the Civil War, as the central Confederate currency failed, primarily because of massive counterfeiting by the Union. Cities in the Confederacy issued their own currency. We saw it certainly during the startup of the U.S., currencies were regional within the colonies. We saw it during the Depression of the 1930s, when confidence in the U.S. dollar was at an all-time low. Communities created and used their own value-based currencies, issued by the government or issued by some other body without interest being attached to it. That's the difference between financial success and financial failure. Having a currency that operates as a public utility. And more financial experts are coming on out and saying that really Greece would be better off leaving the EU. There's an article over at the Daily Bell saying starvation is the price Greeks will pay for remaining in the European Union. They're losing their pensions, they're losing their savings, they have no opportunities for the future, they're really better off leaving. And if you think about it, we're facing exactly that same reality here in the United States of America, with the out-of-control spending and borrowing and enslavement to the Federal Reserve. If every single American worked as hard as they could to create jobs, create money, create wealth, and turned it over to the Federal Reserve, to the Wall Street money junkies, what would it get them? The government would still be spying on you because it doesn't trust you. It would still curtail your freedoms. And there would just be more debt. There is no escaping that 11th marble. And that's a concept you need to keep in mind, because we're seeing that 11th marble have its way. Cyprus, Greece, Italy, they're in trouble. And here in the United States of America. Now, getting back to Greece, Alexis Tsipras is saying that the IMF bears criminal responsibility for the economic crisis because of their manipulations. And he's partly right, but let's not let Goldman Sachs or Papandreou off the hook, because they created half this mess all by themselves. There is plenty of blame to go around, all of it originating with this desire for profits above all else. And amazingly enough, over at Common Dreams, they've got an article on the IMF has issued a report admitting that the obsession with profits is killing prosperity. They're basically saying trickle-down economics is dead. You cannot rely on the spoils of the extremely wealthy to benefit the rest of us. Of course not. They just keep it. And I'm tired of being trickled on and told it is wealth. It doesn't work. When you give money to money junkies, they hang on to it. They pile it up in the middle of their living room, take off their clothes, roll around on it naked, and have orgasms. The reality is the super rich, there aren't enough hours in the day for them to go out and spend the money necessary to power the economy. The money has to be down here in the working and middle class people so we can go to those shopping malls and buy products. It's just not happening. Let's see, story coming out of Investment Watch blog. The escape from bail-ins and fees on cash deposits is physical cash, hence the sudden flurry of calls to eliminate cash. We've been talking about that, but there are voices starting to speak out in opposition to this idea of a cashless society. They're saying the same thing that I've been saying. It cannot be made to work. We're coming up here on the news break. When we come back from the news, we'll be talking about cashless society, why it won't work, and some of the voices starting to stand up and say it's a bad idea. We're going to take a break for the news. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and the phone lines are working. They are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We've already got a caller calling in on this right now. Before we take the phone call, though, I want to finish up on this thought about all the bail-ins and fees, and what all these bankers and governments are doing is they're out there fighting over how much of your own money you should be allowed to keep. That's a big part of this push for a cashless society, that you can't be trusted with your own money. You might buy something they don't approve of, like organic food. Or you might donate to a charity they don't approve of, like Gaza. And you can't be allowed to just decide what to do with your own money, even though that was a founding principle of the United States of America. Now, the head of the Bundesbank is out there saying, no, this idea of a cash ban is simply not going to work. There is too much of the economy that involves having currency. Not everybody is going to have one of those little plastic terminals. Certainly the little kids with their lemonade stands don't. Except the police are shutting them down because they don't have an official government permit to sell lemonade to raise money. Those charity groups over at the supermarket that are selling bakery goods so they can buy school supplies, they're not going to have one of those little card scanners. And like I said, I knew from the start they were never going to go with this cash ban, because what would the politicians stick in the G-strings of all those strippers? All right. We're going to go to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
They can do what Jerry Springer did, give him a check.
That's always hey, there's a way. If they ban cash, you can write checks to yourself and just hang on to them. That'd keep it out of the bank.
Mike, this is fascism. Living off the grid, they tell you can't. Fascism. You can't run a lemonade stand or have a garage sale and use cash. This is all fascism. When are people going to realize it?
Well, the sooner the better. We stopped being a capitalist country a long, long time ago. We are in a hardcore fascist economic dictatorship. It is spreading global, and our only salvation is going to be if it all falls apart before they can complete their plan. Because nobody is going to support a global government that is dead broke and hopelessly in debt on the first day they come into power.
Hey, Mike, the IMF is nothing more but a loan shark. I mean, you look at what we did in Ukraine, overthrow, and then we put a puppet in who sells off their assets. That's what the IMF does. They'll put you into debt, knowing you can't pay it back, come in, and then they'll buy off your assets at pennies on the dollar. That's
exactly right. That's why they're so hated around the world. They're trying to privatize the entire world. They don't think the people of a nation should own anything within that nation. And it's rather interesting that Abraham Lincoln himself said, with the emergence of corporations, that one day we were all going to wake up as tenants on the land that our forefathers conquered.
And it's sad, there's still a percentage of Americans who are just complacent, or they just don't care. It's like
shrinking minority, dwindling minority.
Yeah, but and you're right, it's all around the world. Look at the United Kingdom, and I mean, it's just talk about totalitarian police state over there. Holy smoke. I mean, you got UK and us. I mean, we got more cameras combined than Russia and China combined, you know?
Yeah, we really do. And you know what's really funny? When the Romanian Revolution happened, and Ceausescu got machine-gunned on Romanian national TV, one of the big issues that people who said this was a good thing was that Ceausescu had been putting up TV cameras on all the street corners in Romania to spy on his people, and everybody said, oh, that's a bad thing, that's a bad thing. And, you know, the cameras are certainly up in this country, and I don't know if you're seeing this where you are, but here in Hawaii, I guess the cameras actually have a rather short shelf life because all of a sudden they're putting up these new, smaller ones, and they're not even bothering taking down the old ones, which I guess aren't working anymore.
Well, I'm in New Jersey. I'm behind enemy lines.
Okay.
And, Mike, no, if you look at East Berlin, I mean, they had dossiers on everybody, and because they had manpower, people doing the work. But now you got the data center in Utah. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out. You got all those hard drives they got. There ain't enough terrorists in the known universe to fill all those hard drives, so they're going to fill it with somebody else, us.
Yeah, they used to call it total information awareness. They want to know everything about us. At the same time, they turn around and say that we, the people, have got no right to look into the workings of this government, supposedly of the people, by the people, and for the people, getting back to Lincoln. But, our government has become more secret than, well, even East Germany. You know, you're not supposed to know what's going on. These trade agreements are all secret. You're not supposed to know what's there. And we all know what these trade agreements are about. You know, they're going to remove all safety labeling, all ingredient labeling. Just take your mystery food and eat it and be glad for it.
It's a corporate takeover.
That's exactly what it is. It's the corporatization of the entire world, and the reason I'm opposed to it is very simple. Civil governments, no matter how bad they are, have to be responsive to the needs of all their population. Corporate government is just like a theocracy. They're just worshiping that golden idol, and anything that they do to the population is justified by the worship of that golden idol, including killing off non-productive segments of the population.
Hence, they'll bring in the robot. Hey, what happened to Nancy Pelosi's, you got to pass it before we can read it? She ran against the TPP, huh?
Yeah, but somebody else picked up the slack and said, we got to pass this and then we'll tell you what's inside it. And I've been seeing all these articles where everybody's screaming about the displacement of workers by robots, and it, too, is an idea that will work at the very beginning to boost profits, and then it will fall flat on its face, because the ultimate end of this automation and robotics push are going to be shopping malls filled with these robots with absolutely nothing to do, because there's nobody in there buying any of the products.
They'll be like little Daleks driving around. I wonder who would be the first one to take one out.
Well, by the way, last night on cable we saw this really cool movie called Chappie. It's by the same people who did District 9. It was really very nicely done. A lot of mistakes in terms of how AI is going to behave, but that's just a technical. It's a fun movie. It's actually a fun movie.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go and switch over to Damien in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I have several points to make, and I'll try to make them as quickly as possible as well. Some information specifically about things going on here in New York, and you mentioned about Crate and Barrel, so I know a lot about that as well. Let me just say, a lot of people are really, it's not as though they are, they don't care. A lot of people really, the level of awareness that we understand and everything is not really the normal, because people really don't understand. They turn this into something that's a complex issue when it really isn't. The plain and simple truth is the same across the board, whether you're talking about the banking system or the healthcare system. Here in New York, it's gone down into just 3 corporations, basically, with the healthcare system. It's just all these, the same thing with the banks. Big banks eating up all the little banks, and what happens? They gain more power, they gain more wealth, they have more power and corruption over the government. They're able to make the rules. Same thing with the healthcare system. Same thing with the banking system. Now we're having the same situation with landlords, property management, and all that stuff in Manhattan, where the environment that's been created is a false environment. We're living in a false environment. The entirety of where the income level of everybody is, and where household income level and all this, there is a complete disconnect, because you've got people making way too much money. You've got interest rates being manipulated on a level that's not relative to what's really actually going on, and you've got inflation rates raising at a level that does not reflect what's actually going on in serious household income. So the environment that's created is completely false. We are living in a false reality because of what's been able to, what the banks and these corporations and their manipulation of government.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to respond to your comments when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And responding to that last caller, the system is very much out of whack. You need to remember that a long time ago in this country, the laws were written to try and keep things in balance. There were laws that limited corporations from becoming monopolies, like the Sherman Antitrust Act and various others. There were laws that limited how much media any one group could own to try and keep diversity and competition going, because competition will boost quality and lower prices. And we have had many episodes throughout history where monopolies have arisen and caused huge amounts of damage. Prices go up, quality goes down, because that's what happens when you get a monopoly. And it seems like we keep making these same mistakes over and over again, because we'll pass these laws, like Glass-Steagall, and then eventually we find a Congress who's willing to basically look the other way and rescind the law in exchange for campaign donations. And you need to understand that government, meaning the politicians within it, make their money in a system very much like the old Catholic system of indulgences. They come up with a whole bunch of rules you are not allowed to break. And then the rich can come on in and put a huge pile of coins in the collection plate or a check in a politician's pocket to get an exemption, a dispensation. What is sinful or illegal for everybody else is going to be allowed for you this one time. That's how the politicians make their money. They set up fences all over the place, and then they rent out the keys to the rich people. That's exactly how this all works. And again, we've been through this cycle before. Laws to keep the economy in balance and working for everybody, they get subverted by greedy corporations and complicit politicians until the system becomes unstable and hovers at the edge of falling apart. And then somebody somewhere's got to stand up, look at the wide view of what's going on for the nation as a whole, and say, we've got to pull back. We've got to regain that sense of balance. Because the proper role of the government is to act as an arbitrator between the greed of the corporations and what is good for the people of the nation as a whole. Our government, unfortunately, has gone completely over to the side of the money junkies. And it's good in the short term. Lots of campaign donations, lots of profits coming in, but it can't work in the long run. Because, contrary to their own self-delusions, those Wall Street money junkies need the American people to be going into the shopping malls, to be buying things. The way our country's finances are currently set up, it's like tying a tourniquet around your own neck. And for a little while, you feel good because all the blood and nutrients are being driven to the brain and they're not allowed to go back down to the body. But then, of course, we know what's going to happen. That good feeling will pass away and serious problems start occurring, and that's exactly what's going on right now. In response to that caller who was saying most Americans are still oblivious, there's an article over at shtfplan.com basically talking about a new Gallup poll that shows Americans do not believe or trust its institutions. The system is broken. Americans' confidence in U.S. government and financial institutions is way below the historical average. People are discouraged. People are frustrated. People are angry. And anger is a good thing. I know there's everybody out there saying, oh, you should never be angry. You should never be mad. It's a bad thing. No, it isn't. We evolved to be able to feel rage and anger as a survival mechanism to motivate us to contend with those who are a threat to ourselves, our loved ones, our family, our village, our society. Anger and rage are there for a reason. It's the reason we're still here on Earth, and those 40,000-year-old sort of humans who were making that bracelet that they found in the cave in Russia aren't around anymore. Rage and anger can work for you. All right, Russia kicks de-dollarization into high gear, may issue bonds in Chinese yuan. This was reported a couple of weeks ago, but apparently they're very serious about it. Meanwhile, here in the United States of America, the Congressional Budget Office again is sounding the warning that the U.S. faces a massive debt problem. The debt is unsustainable. It never really was because of that 11th marble. Once you are enslaved to a private central bank that issues all the currency as a loan at interest, in the long run, the debt has to collapse the nation. By the way, over at the U.S. Treasury, their website is showing the official U.S. government debt is currently $18 trillion and change. That number has not changed at all in the last 90 days, 3 months. Don't suppose they might be hiding something from you all, like the fact that the U.S. government has broken its mandated debt ceiling in order to borrow money to put into wars and their own pockets, so forth and so on. The Fed's balance sheet is currently standing at 25% of the nation's gross domestic product. That's an unhealthy number. Another story coming out of Investment Watch blog, U.S. manufacturers are dialing back expectations for hiring, investment, and exports. I think when we get into July and we get those second quarter numbers, they are not going to be good, and they're not going to have that really freezing cold winter to blame it on, which you, as loyal Americans, will forget actually happened when Obama starts talking about global warming and his carbon tax again. Okay. Let's see. Over at NatWest and Royal Bank of Scotland, they've had another problem. They're saying it's a technical glitch where account payments have gone missing. The issue has affected 600,000 transactions across RBS, NatWest, and Ulster Bank. Now, I think we have seen this pattern before, where a bank gets into a cash crunch and they have to stop issuing payments because they can't cover them. And it's always easy to blame a technical glitch, computer glitch. Remember, there was I think it was Chase Bank some years ago when things were starting to really get crazy, limited ATM withdrawals, saying that their ATM system had been hacked. No other banks were reporting that. We need to understand that when these banks start getting into trouble, they won't admit it. They won't publicize it. They'll have a scapegoat. Oh, it's hackers, technical glitches, the system is breaking down. We'll get you your money eventually. Just go home and be patient. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, out in California, as you are aware, they have a major problem with water. Actually, they have a big problem with water down in Texas. They got too much of it. And it is a reminder that the real issue here is the systems that were built decades ago to move water from where it is to where it's needed have been allowed to basically rot away. Because the issue isn't finding or creating water, it's managing the water that you've got. Water mains are breaking all over this country. The irrigation system out in the western U.S. is delivering about 1/3 of the water it originally did when it was first built. And there is a major problem going on out in California where some communities are already starting to actually go dry, literally run out, including some wealthy communities. It's hammering real estate values. And that is driving huge numbers of California homeowners underwater on their mortgages. We could see a housing collapse start in California that would spread pretty much all across the country. because, hey, we're going to let the frackers contaminate two of the state's largest aquifers, and we're going to give preferential treatment to Nestle, and we're going to let all this water flow into the ocean unused to protect this little tiny fish because that'll keep the environmentalists happy. And this is a major problem, because we could see a repeat of the housing collapse of 2008. Because if people owe more on their mortgage than the house is worth, they're just going to turn in the keys and walk away. Wise management of a nation is managing all of the nation for the benefit of all of the nation. And that is the aspect that has been sorely missing from Washington, D.C. for decades. Everybody's there to line their own pockets and do what their backers and supporters tell them to do. And nobody's maintaining an overview of what is best for the nation as a whole over the long term. And if there is one person who should be following that job description more than anybody else in the country, it's the person sitting in that Oval Office. We're continuing to see the abuse of the H-1B visa program. Part of the justification for its success is the fact that our educational system has undermined the ability of young Americans to think creatively, analytically, problem solve. And companies are having to get better trained people from other countries. But they are abusing it because it's also economic. Every time a company like Disney fires a domestic American worker and brings in one of these H-1B visa program workers, they're saving an average of $40,000 per year for each American replaced with a foreign worker. Again, not thinking long term. Now, here in Hawaii, they've come up with a very interesting solution for the homeless problem. And we do have a major, major homeless problem. It's exacerbated by the fact that people will come out here. They're expecting jobs. They get out here. The job they were promised turns out not to be there, or the company goes out of business. Our tourism has just been kneecapped by the TSA. Our local tourism authority likes to claim that, our hotels have got 85% occupancy, and what they don't mention are all the hotels and resorts that have simply shut down completely. Because people don't want to come to vacation in the United States of America because they get treated like they're going into a POW camp. There have also been cases where small communities on the mainland who've got some homeless people, they'll buy them one-way tickets to Hawaii to get rid of them. And if you're going to be homeless, Hawaii is a really good place to be there. There's an architect here in Honolulu that is going to start taking the city's outdated buses and convert them into residential units, like sort of a giant recreational vehicle. And this is being done by Ma Ri Kim of Group 70, International Architecture. Not sure who's going to fund it. It sounds like a very expensive form of housing for the homeless, but at least they're trying to do something. And he said basically they've designed this, okay, so that you can basically, if you've got access to one of these buses, you can walk into a hardware store, buy everything you need in one go, and build it with no special trade skills. So they're talking about volunteers going in and doing these conversions. And these buses are going to have toilet facilities, showers, kitchen, cooking facilities, and sleeping facilities. Anyway. Now, let's talk about politics. As you know, the politicking is going on for next year's elections. We're still way more than a year, and we're already in this race here. And do you remember back in 2008 where everybody who was up there making a campaign speech, it was terror, 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 9/11, 9/11, 9/11, Osama bin Laden, terror, terror, terror. Well, they've changed the script. And somebody put together this very funny video about the current presidential candidates. And all they're saying it's Putin, Russia, Russia, Putin, Putin's the danger, Russia, Russia, Russia. Thinking it's going to work again. And it isn't. Because we have seen this same sales pitch before. And we know how it turned out. The U.S. invaded an innocent country, innocent of any wrongdoing, tortured innocent Iraqis to death to find nuclear weapons that never existed. Donald Trump is out there saying the U.S. nuclear arsenal doesn't work. Putin could strike us at any moment. That's it. That's what they're going to be campaigning on. We've got to go to war against Russia. They don't want to talk about the economy. Don't even want to talk about Obamacare. They're just talking about death and mayhem. Donald Trump is also out there saying Edward Snowden should be assassinated. Now, meanwhile, over in the Democratic camp, they are really trying to crank up feminism as a campaign issue for Hillary to run on. And there was an interesting article where they're talking about the 15 worst states for women. And they're, of course, all GOP stronghold states. And they're out there screaming about the women don't have equal pay, women don't have... They're trying to fan up that militant feminist agenda from the 1990s. Oh, there's rape out there, there's this, there's that. And these are all fringe issues, whether it's feminism, immigration, abortion, gay marriage. Every election we see the same thing. They don't want to talk about the wars. That's an election loser. They certainly don't want to talk about the economy. That's an election loser. So they come up with all these little fringe issues, and they're fanned up in the media that this is what you should decide your vote on, women's rights and gay rights and all the rest of that. Because if these politicians actually ran on their job performance relative to the economy and the wars, they would all be out of work. And they don't want that. Now, bringing back the 1990s male bash feminism may not be getting traction because according to CNN, they're saying Hillary Clinton's latest polls are showing tremendous weakness. Up in New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders is trailing her by just 10 points. For a guy who doesn't have the name value that Hillary Clinton does, that's a gap he can overcome very easily. And I got to tell you, Bernie Sanders is looking better and better to me all the time. This election's version of Ron Paul, which means they're going to give him the heave-ho any way that they can. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And one of my listeners just informed me that Bernie Sanders believes in human-caused global warming, so he's off my list. I should have really filed to run because from where I sit, and this is not my vanity, I seem to be the most credible candidate for president this year. But it's too late now. And but they're all out there pushing war. They're all out there pushing more money for the bankers. They're all out there pushing support for Israel and global warming. We don't really have a choice. We do not really have a choice going into this election. Once again, it's the lesser of several evils. They're all evil. We're just going to be voting. It's a best dress contest is what it is, which is going to exclude Donald Trump because with Donald Trump in the campaign, there's going to be heck to pay. Now, over at the Clinton camp, they're still charging huge fees for speaking engagements to groups. And to give you an example of how this works, back in 2009, Condoleezza Rice was the featured speaker at a fundraising luncheon for the Boys and Girls Club of Long Beach. She was paid a $60,000 speaking fee, most of which she turned around and donated back to the club, which is a cool thing to do, I think. Now, Hillary Clinton wasn't quite as generous. She got a $200,000 fee to speak at the same event 5 years later, donated nothing back to the club, and then apparently just ignored the boys and girls. Didn't want to be bothered. Just took her money, and Hillary has left the building, as it were. Interesting little article over in thenation.com. Jeb Bush is out of his depth on foreign policy. Russian media is saying exactly the same thing. He's just as clueless about how foreign policy works as George W. was. He's just going to go into the Oval Office and whatever his advisors tell him to do, that's what he'll sign his name on. And next time you see Jeb Bush talking on TV, Turn off the sound and just watch his face. Look at his eyes. He almost looks like he's thinking, am I fooling them? Am I fooling them? Are they buying this? I can't tell if he's a televangelist or a used car salesman, watching him with the sound turned off here. And, it doesn't matter what all these people are saying on TV. It turns out the latest numbers are, of the American population under the age of 35, only 23% of them watch the TV news at some point during the week. 23%. They've figured it out. 77% of the American people under age 35 know the TV corporate news is a lie. They're over here on the independent media, finding out what's going on. It's very encouraging. Little story and a little warning from Blacklisted News. As you know, I got my first exposure to what the FBI is doing back in 1970 when I got invited to participate in this anti-war rally down at Disneyland in Anaheim that went completely out of control, became known as the day the hippies took over Disneyland. They were smoking marijuana on Tom Sawyer's Island. They trashed the place and attacked Mickey Mouse. And it turned out the whole thing was staged by the FBI under orders from the Nixon White House to find a way to discredit the anti-war movement. And they got all these students from all these Southern California college campuses by using undercover informants posing as students. Now, in 1975, the FBI had 1,500 informants across the country. In 2011, over 15,000 informants. Nobody knows how many they have today, but they are a reality. If you are in college, that smelly guy trying to get you to set fire to a building is probably an undercover FBI informant. Their job is to go in and lure activists who are opposed to government policies into doing something they can be arrested and jailed for, or just simply make their group look bad. It's how they do it. And you need to go back and read the history of COINTELPRO. And how many, just in recent months, how many of these so-called terrorist arrests involved an undercover informant setting up a bunch of patsies, saying, hey, let's do this, here's the money, here's the supplies, here's all the things that you need. Boom, you're arrested. And they get a headline, terrorist arrest. It is a reality. It is an absolute guarantee. If you're on a college campus or a junior college campus, by now it could even be high schools. Some of those people around you think are students, are undercover FBI informants. And they are there to mess you up. Now, over in Congress, freshman Representative Ted Lieu is on the warpath against the National Security Agency. And he was taking part in a hearing on the House Subcommittee on Information Technology that are wringing their hands over the fact that the U.S. computer industry is losing huge amounts of money because of the Edward Snowden revelations. And what are they going to do about it? And Ted Lieu basically came back and said, you would not be in this mess if you had been complying with the Constitution. If you'd been playing by the rules, there wouldn't be a spy scandal. You wouldn't have all these other countries starting up their own chip-making facilities, or their own internet, or their own computer manufacturing to get away from the NSA. This disaster was made by the NSA, not by Edward Snowden. The NSA broke the rules. Apparently one of the topics they're talking about at this hearing is finding a way to criminalize encryption, to make you dependent on government-approved encryption systems, which, of course, the government can read. But the government is the biggest threat to the safety of your business data. They're the biggest cyber criminal of all. Turns out this hacker group is actually the NSA. Now, getting on back to that Sunday Times story, the Sunday Times is throwing a tantrum that Glenn Greenwald came out and said, no, Edward Snowden's files were not successfully decrypted by Russia and China, thereby endangering our foreign assets because those files were destroyed. before he went to Russia. Over in Hong Kong, Edward Snowden's lawyer has issued a statement saying he personally witnessed Snowden destroy his copy of those files before he left the country. The Sunday Times just made it up, and one of their reporters was interviewed on CNN saying, I'm just writing what the British government tells me to write. That's my job, to lie to you for the government. They're admitting it. Microsoft is losing ground in Russia as local software adoption skyrockets amid foreign sanctions and the NSA scandal. Meanwhile, Obama is trying to use all of these hacking attacks that are tracked back to the NSA to push for Internet ID verification, which isn't going to work because there are ID systems out there that the NSA spoofs, the cybercriminals spoof. It's another completely pointless, useless waste of taxpayer money to mandate an ID system that the good people will use and the bad people will evade, just like gun laws. Another article over in Mother Jones. It's a warning. Congress fix for all the cyber attacks, which happened just when Obama needed to push him for the cybersecurity, are simply going to hand the government control of more of your data. I don't want the government controlling my data. It's none of their business. I don't want them stealing my business secrets to give to their cronies, which they've been caught doing. I don't want them rushing off to their stock broker to buy stock in my company because they know ahead of time I've got a product coming out. I don't want them to have pictures of my lovely wife in states of undress, or my Aunt Mary's top secret chocolate chip cookie recipe. It's none of their business. The NSA is the rogue. They broke the rules. They're the bad guys. All right, we're coming up here on another news break. When we come back, hopefully we are going to have our guest Alex Newman on the phone to talk about crime of educators and a bunch of other things. And again, it's a really, really good book. I still have not had the time to get all the way through it, but the part I've read, it really is very much there. And he gets into the pushing of drugs on our kids and Common Core and the rest of it. So we're going to take a break for the news. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome to our show, hour number 3. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And joining us on the phone now is Alex Newman. He is co-author of this marvelous book, Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. And there's even an endorsement from Ron Paul saying this is a compelling case that America's public education system must undergo radical change. So, Alex, aloha. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Aloha. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I have not been able to read all the way through the book just yet. My free time these days is taken up with PHP and SQL, but I did get into it enough to see that you really have gone into a tremendous detail about how our educational system is really more about indoctrination. You touch on Common Core, you touch on the prescribing of drugs to our kids and everything. So why don't you tell our listeners why you wrote the book and what you think some of these major problems are?
So thanks very much. Really the main point of the book is that the public education system as it exists today was scientifically designed to dumb down the children. So, people make the mistake of thinking this is just some kind of huge national act. 55% of Americans can barely read according to the government. And it's no accident at all. It was designed to produce exactly the results it's producing. And Dr. Blumenfeld, he unfortunately just passed away about 2 weeks ago, but he's been researching this for about 50 years. And, he wrote 10 books on education. And educators would be left.
Okay, we seem to be having another line. Yeah, we're going to have to drop Alex and try and contact him again. Apparently, we're still having some issues with the phone system here, and we're going to try and get him back. So while Tom reconnects with Alex to get him on the line here, boy, don't you just love living in a fascist dictatorship where nothing really works and they're going to charge you more for it and make it mandatory? Speaking of fraud, we already see all of our candidates out there running for president talking about, how many favorites they have and, how many likes they have on their Facebook page. And there was a very enlightening story over at Investment Watch blog talking about these companies that have been started over in Asia. They call them click farms, and all they do is generate fake profiles on Facebook through which they will then like whoever they're being paid to like. So it's a huge amount of fraud out there when they say, I've got so many thousands of Twitter followers and so many thousands of Facebook followers. It's all bought and paid for. All bought and paid for. Now, if you are one of those people who is convinced that you don't need to worry about malware because you're on Apple, apparently there is another zero-day exploit that's been found for iOS and OS X that is going to loot your passwords and various other private information. Apple did a big ad campaign about how they were somehow immune from all the malware, and they weren't really immune. It's just in the early days there were so few Apples compared to Windows machines that the hackers didn't bother. Well, Apple has increased its market penetration. They've got a larger share, and now there are enough Apple computers out there where it's worth the time of the cyber criminals to go after them, especially because the Apple products tend to be in the hands of the more affluent members of our population. And so that makes them an even more attractive target here. Apparently there's another exploit has been found that turns Samsung Galaxy phones into remote bugging devices. And I don't think the cyber criminals are creating this. They're just finding all the back doors the NSA has planted on all of our hardware. The NSA has not made our computer systems more secure. They're less secure because the NSA bored all of these holes through them to spy on you, and sooner or later, the cyber criminals, those who aren't working for the NSA, will find them. Okay. Now then, I think we're still trying to get Alex back on the show here. Interesting story coming out of the Daily Coin. There is documentation that has surfaced regarding the Thatcher government was operating death squads in Northern Ireland that killed hundreds of people, hundreds of Catholics, all to support the British Crown. So this idea of simply wiping out large segments of the population to preserve wealth and power, it's not an old idea, it's not a new idea. Okay, we're going to get a call back from Alex in 5 minutes. Apparently he's in an area where the cell phone coverage just isn't really working too well. Apparently, in anticipation of Freedom of Information requests, Downing Street is starting to delete their emails so that they don't have anything that can be acquired by people who are trying to find out just what their government has been doing in the dark recesses. Now, following on the news about how under 35s are not watching TV corporate news anymore, the Gallup poll that shows a complete loss of confidence in institutions by Americans. There's another article over here. This is from ZenGardner.com. The Backlash of Awakening Humanity. And it's basically saying that all across the world, people are waking up to the reality that their governments do not serve them, the banks do not serve them, the governments and banks together prey on us, get rich on us. And humanity is starting to stand up and say, we really don't like the way this is being done. And this article talks about some of the panic reactions we're seeing from people in positions of power who are trying to find some way they can get the trust of the people back. And it's not going to happen. Trust arrives on foot, but it departs on horseback. And that is certainly true here. And a good example of the panic reaction, Netanyahu out there saying that the supporters of BDS are all the equivalent of Nazi Germany or the people who did 9/11. The propaganda is getting more and more extreme, and that's why it isn't working. Because propaganda only works when the people don't realize they're being propagandized and when they still have a degree of trust in the institutions of government and the corporate media to tell them the truth. Neither of those exist in the United States of America, or for that matter, pretty much anywhere else on the planet. Humanity is waking up to the reality of what their societies have been. It's not for our benefit. Okay, still dealing with phone issues here. Let's see. Over in North Carolina, the sheriffs have aligned themselves with gun control groups. They're mounting, apparently Gabby Gifford's super PAC is mounting an ad buy to basically push the idea that before you can buy a gun in North Carolina, you will be required to buy, at huge expense, a permit ahead of time. And the goal here is by making the permits expensive to discourage people from buying guns. What part of shall not be infringed do you not understand? Now, critics of this system are already out there saying there's no reason to have a permitting system. The current federal background check is more than adequate, and this high cost of permits discriminates against the poor, especially African Americans. It deprives them unconstitutionally of their right to keep and bear arms. Not satisfied with the guns, there was another article over here at Zero Hedge where the U.S. government is now proposing regulation of knives. And they're looking at this bill which would try and unify knife laws all across the country to basically knives that have to be in safety holders, knives that are below a certain length, and all the rest of that. And it's estimated to cost $77 million, which isn't much for government spending, but basically they want to spend $77 million of your tax dollars to protect knife owners. And if you own an illegal knife, you may be considered a threat. Why this is nonsense when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're getting word here that our phone system has failed again. And so we're going to have to reschedule with Alex to talk about his book. It is really important that you hear what he has to say. And
sounds like I got him on a good connection if you want to try him one more time.
Alex, are you there? Alex, are you there?
I'm here. How are you?
Oh, good. You sound so much better. I'm so glad we got you back here. So, again, tell us about why you wrote the book and what are the major problems with our current educational system.
Sure. Well, thank you very much again. The reason I wrote the book, well, Dr. Blumenfeld, who I wrote this book with, he's been researching education for 50 years. He just passed away 2 weeks ago, but this was his life's work. And he had been really focused on the past, and I had been working on what's going on now and where this is all going in the future. So we got together and we put together this book. And basically what Sam and I exposed in this book is that what the schools are doing is deliberately dumbing down the children. This is not some huge national accident that we're all being accidentally dumbed down. This was deliberately designed into the system, and so the results we're getting are exactly what the designers of this system wanted, which is illiteracy, indoctrination, and craziness. And, we argue that this is criminal. Destroying the minds of a nation is, the height of criminality.
Well, George Carlin used to say that what the real owners of the country want are mindless, obedient servants. And a lot of this philosophy, if you will, goes back to the Carnegie Foundation, because Andrew Carnegie actually viewed the ultra-wealthy as a distinct species of human beings. And the Carnegie Foundation's educational agenda was that ordinary workers should only be taught the bare minimum they needed to follow orders, do their work at the factory, fill out the paperwork, and not confuse their little childlike minds with any other issues like democracy and republican and so forth and the rest of it. I've been involved in teaching myself many years ago at the high school level, and even back then I was just infuriated by the way all the effort was being put into trying to force kids who weren't interested in subjects, in this case mathematics, to achieve some goal, and the kids who were in the class who wanted to learn more were just being neglected. And I had a real problem with that, which is why I didn't stay with that particular career path. And I notice in your book you're talking about the forced drugging of our kids. You touch on Common Core. And, of course, we know one of the artifacts of this whole educational dumbing down is that corporations have an excuse to go to the H-1B visa program and bring in kids educated in other countries where they're still worried about education. And it really just seems so short-sighted that they really have destroyed the future potential for this country to ever regain its industrial technological edge.
Oh, there's no question about it. And, the point you mentioned about Carnegie, there was a whole cabal of these guys, and we focus on John Dewey, but he got a lot of his financing from John D. Rockefeller. The idea of John Dewey was to reduce and destroy the literacy of the American people, and he got money from the Rockefellers to do it, and he succeeded wildly. What he did was he got rid of the phonics method, which is how you teach a phonetic alphabet and a phonetic language and a phonetic written language like we have, and he replaced it with this whole word method where they teach the children to read English words as if they were Chinese characters. So they're supposed to memorize lists of words rather than, sounding out the letters and figuring out what the word actually says. And so, you're absolutely right that they've destroyed not just the capacity for us to ever regain our industrial strength and our technological strength and our scientific leadership, but, even to sustain this experiment in liberty. It's going to be all gone if we don't fix this. The schools are mass producing illiterates who cannot use critical thinking to save their lives. And, if they can't critically think, if they don't know their history, if they don't know even how to read a book, much less the Constitution or, something like that, there's no chance we're going to be able to keep our liberties and our Constitution in this country. And so we argue that it's extremely urgent to turn this around, not just from an economic perspective, but from the perspective of actually saving our nation.
Well, we used to have a neighbor here that worked with the local Common Core provider, and she shared some of this information with me. And a lot of people have been appalled how Common Core has literally rewritten the Bill of Rights to change its meaning. And I think the most glaring example is where Common Core teaches that the Second Amendment gives you the right to keep and bear arms if you are part of a government militia, which is, of course, not what the Second Amendment says. The other thing was how they taught these kids to solve math problems, and it's just intentionally designed to bog them down and mire them with all of this convoluted, boxes and lines and everything, and it literally is hobbling our kids' ability to think, and how they imagine that we're going to have a prosperous nation with kids who are taught to feel good about themselves, self-esteem. They've got all the latest running shoes and T-shirts and everything, but they can't actually function. They can't solve problems when they come up. And coupled with the deterioration of our software, it really does seem like it's a poorly thought out process. I can understand the immediate goal. They want a generation that's going to grow up being obedient consumers and workers. They're going to be used to eating the food that they were getting with the Michelle Obama lunches and not care about GMO or organic or anything. But in the long run, it is a recipe for the downfall of our nation.
That's exactly right. And, it's not just our opinion. In 1983, Ronald Reagan's National Commission for Excellence in Education, they concluded, government committees don't normally use strong language, but they concluded that this education system threatens the future of our nation and our future as a people. And they also said that if a foreign power had imposed this system on us, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. And what Dr. Blumenfeld and I argue is that we should view this as an act of war. Just because it wasn't done by foreigners doesn't make it any less criminal or treasonous. The brain power of our nation is being deliberately reduced. And, you talked about math, and you're absolutely right. Math is disastrous. The only math expert that the Common Core people put on the Common Core Validation Committee, Dr. James Milgram from Stanford, he refused to sign off on the standards, and I encourage everyone to read the letter he wrote for why he wouldn't sign off. Among other complaints, he said some of these standards are based on incorrect math. So how they could roll this out across the country, it's either lunacy on a mass scale or criminality. We argue for criminality because they're not that stupid and they're not crazy. And the English is just as disastrous. You're absolutely right that they're changing the Bill of Rights. They're changing our history. The kids are going to graduate not knowing anything about our Constitution, about the Founding Fathers, about the history of our nation, except, all the evil, horrible, wicked things. And there's a place for that. But to just indoctrinate them to hate freedom and to hate America, it's very dangerous for the future of our nation. And then when you get to the teaching of reading and the teaching of writing, they're eliminating cursive. And really, one of the main points of our book is this notion of destroying literacy, because John Dewey specifically did this for the purpose of reducing the literacy of the American people. He knew it was quackery when he did it. This whole word method, it had been developed to teach deaf children to read because they couldn't sound out the words because they weren't familiar with sound.
Okay, Alex, we got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be right back and hear more of what you have to say. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and close the phone lines for the rest of the show because we're still having issues with our switchboard. But we are talking with Alex Newman, co-author of the book Crimes of the Educators. And it is an amazing book. I am going to finish reading it here. And before I hand the microphone back to you, Alex, I want to share something that I noticed even when I was back teaching at the high school level in Southern California, and it was the way that history was being taught. As name, place, date, name, place, date, name, place, date. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and you would walk out of the class thinking that you knew history because you had a name, a place, and a date. But what you didn't have were the connections between events, the cause and effect. And it occurred to me that the reason they were not teaching cause and effect in history was so that you would not see cause and effect when it's happening right in front of your eyes today. And it's another way in which our educational system is really about brainwashing our kids to accepting the New World Order or Michelle Obama lunches. And all of this drugging for ADHD, which the guy who came up with that shortly before he passed away said it was a completely fictitious, made-up disease to sell medication. And the schools are part and parcel to forcing these medications on kids because they get a financial incentive for it. So please pick up where you left off.
Sure. You're absolutely right about the schools and the ADHD. One of the things we talk about in the book is how the schools are inducing all of these so-called disorders, including dyslexia. And I know that sounds shocking to a lot of people, but my co-author, Dr. Blumenfeld, he cured a lot of dyslexics, and you're not supposed to be able to do that. And he did it simply just by teaching them to read the proper way, using phonics, and getting rid of their acquired reflex that they acquired at the school to look at the words as, symbols rather than collections of letters, each with their own sound that turn into a word when you read it. So that's a huge issue. And then you also have the ADD and the ADHD. Basically, these schools are dumbing down the children. They're harming their minds physically, and the brain scans now show this when you teach this way of reading. It physically damages the mind. And to deal with all of that, they came up with these silly labels like ADD and ADHD. A lot of people don't understand this. Psychiatry is not really an objective science or objective medicine like the rest of medicine. These psychiatrists get together and they vote on what should be considered a disease. So they voted to consider ADD and ADHD a disease, and they voted on the list of symptoms. And there's huge profits in this, and it's exploding. You now have about 1 in 10 boys in the government schools now on these hard drugs. And they are hard drugs. I think a lot of people think of them as medicine, but they shouldn't. I mean, these are hardcore amphetamines. If you bought this on the street, you would go to jail, and it would be a big deal. This is practically crystal meth in a pharmaceutical bottle, and it has permanent damage that it does to children. It has addictive potential, and it's all to deal with the problems that the schools are producing in the children. So now when they have Common Core, it's all going to get worse. And you're absolutely right about the broader agenda too. They're indoctrinating the kids to be accepting of this new world order that they say they're creating. They're telling us they're creating it. It's going to be a global government with lots of tyranny and no rights. And they're brainwashing the kids to accept this. They're obliterating even the notion of rights in the mind of the children. And they're turning them into, good collectivists, everything for the common good, where we heard that nonsense before. And it's going to end in disaster if the American people don't wake up and protect their children from this. I mean, what could be more important? Every dictator in all of history has understood that if you want to be a dictator, if you want to control the population, you go for the schools, because then you can mold the minds of the young, and then you can rule in perpetuity. And so we need to stop this if we're going to save our country, if we're going to save our freedoms, if we're going to stop Congress and the Obama administration from, bombing and making war on everybody and taking away our freedom and surrendering our sovereignty to the UN and to all these, trade agreements, TPP. All of this comes back to education. If we weren't so dumbed down, the politicians could never get away with this.
Well, the original Prussian model, which was the start of public education, was stated flat out, making the next generation more useful to the agenda of the state and get them away from the parents and just mold them into something that was useful to the Prussian imperial designs. Now, when I was a kid in grade school, all the way back in New Hampshire, there was no such thing as ADHD. It was called teacher is boring the heck out of me because I'm one of the smartest kids in the room. But the other aspect is these medications are known to cause suicide, mass violence. They're very, very dangerous in a notable segment of the people who are taking them. And it's all about, pushing pharmaceutical products, getting people used to the fact that you're supposed to take a pill for everything. And you're right about the psychiatrist. Every normal human behavior has been declared a mental illness. They even have come out and said that people's desire to eat natural organic food is a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa, for which I'm sure Pfizer's going to have a pill for any day now. But I'll tell you why this is all going to fail ultimately, because all of this is modeled on this liberal myth that you can re-engineer the human mind by re-engineering society around him. And all of that goes back to Margaret Mead and a book she wrote called Coming of Age in Samoa, where the argument of the book was that the people of Samoa didn't suffer the angst of teenage years that we saw in our culture. Therefore, it was caused by culture and not instinct. The problem is Margaret Mead's book was a complete hoax. She basically just talked to two ladies who were living on Samoa and kept asking leading questions, and these two ladies just told her what they thought she wanted to hear. The government of Samoa actually tracked these ladies down, and they said, yeah, we told her what she wanted to hear. And she based the book on it, and the entire liberal philosophy of reshaping the human psyche by changing the environment is based on this. And it doesn't work. We're still going to go on being human beings with certain needs and wants and desires, and there's no way to engineer that out, no matter how tyrannical the society gets. So, yes, it is doomed to fail in the long run.
I certainly hope you're right about that, Michael, because, that's, if it fails, we're all going to be in much better shape, because the agenda that they have in mind for us is terrible. And I'm also really glad that you brought up the Prussian model, because a lot of people wonder, how did we come to accept and take for granted this notion that we need to hand over our kids to the government for 8 hours a day for 12 years for them to be so-called educated? I mean, if you think about it, outside of the societal context, it sounds so ludicrous. Who would just hand over their kids to total strangers and say, okay, educate them for me? It's just bizarre on the face of things. And, when you dig into the history of how we got this, it's really troubling. You had Horace Mann was really the man most responsible for introducing this system into the United States. He went over to Prussia, and he thought the Prussian model was great because it was very authoritarian. They were segregating the children by age. They had the teachers all being trained by the state so that the children would ultimately all be trained by the state, and compulsory attendance laws. And so Horace Mann introduced this model into the United States. And, I don't have any evidence that he specifically wanted to dumb down Americans, but we certainly have plenty of evidence that he was a statist and loved government to solve, so-called real and imagined problems. And what Horace Mann did was crucial to bring us to where we are today, because when John Dewey came on the scene in the late 1800s, him and his cohorts with Rockefeller money, with big foundation money, were able to seize control of this architecture that Mann had inspired and helped build here in the United States. And that's how we ended up with a nationwide government school system designed to dumb down your children. So if you love your kids, I say get them out of the schools, teach them to read properly, teach them proper history, teach them proper science. And, we need to start abandoning the government school system, because the damage that it's doing, not just on the individuals, but for society at large, is incalculable. It's so massive that I don't think we can even conceive of it, and it needs to be stopped.
Well, it really does here, and you're absolutely right that they're dumbing down people in terms of the sciences, which is why they think they can get away with this human-caused global warming myth. They're not used to dealing with a population that is knowledgeable enough about science to stand up and say, look, what you're talking about is complete and utter nonsense. Got to take another 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Alex Newman here, co-author of Crimes of the Educators here. And before we go any further, where can people get this book? Because especially parents need to read this book to find out what's going on with their kids in school.
Yeah, I think the best place to get it right now is Amazon.com. I know they ran out of the first printing, but I think Amazon still has some copies. But for people who don't like Amazon for whatever reason, I think Walmart is carrying it online, Barnes & Noble, all the big retailers, Target. And then if you want autographed copies, I think the WND Superstore might still have a few left. So.
Well, it is a good book. I put up the link to the Amazon page at whatreallyhappened.com, and hopefully people will look at it. It is a very good book. I'm looking at the section here on the Great American Math Disaster, and your comparison of math problems from 1960 to 1997, and we laugh because there is an element of truth there that we definitely recognize. And even Tom Lehrer, all the way back in the 1960s, was talking about the deterioration of education. And he even did a song about the new math, which he introduced by saying the idea of new math is to understand what you're doing rather than to get the right answer, which very often is the case. And one of the reasons why it is a disaster to not teach kids how to think inside their heads in this day and age of calculators and computers is they need to understand if maybe there's been a mistake someplace. And they've got the calculator set up wrong, for example. Otherwise, they're going to say 2 + 2 = 186 and write it down as the answer, thinking, hey, it came out of the computer, it must be right. And especially with, we've lost our technological advantage over the rest of the world that was so hard won during the moon race of the 1960s. And it led to the tech economic boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now it's like we're throwing that away. And again, the short-term political financial gain is definitely there, but nobody seems to really be thinking about how this is going to harm and destroy this nation in the long run.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, you know, I think the people who did...
Okay. Are you there, Alex? Okay. Well, I think probably our phone system was installed by one of those Common Core students because we cannot seem to keep this thing going at all. All right, well, I'm glad we got out the word about where to get the book because it is good. I'm about halfway through it, and I'm definitely going to be finishing it. And I recommend that you get it because it's not a joke. It's not a conspiracy theory. The government is dumbing down the next generation of Americans into brainwashed, obedient workers who will believe whatever they're told by the government. Human-caused global warming, Saddam's nuclear weapons, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, and so forth. Because this government has gotten along for so long by lying to get what they want, they don't know any other way to operate. And that's probably the main reason for this Common Core push, is to have future generations of Americans who will simply believe what they're told to believe, no matter how ridiculous and absurd it is. Okay. All righty. Now, I want to get back to this story we were talking about earlier before we got Alex on the line. The U.S. government not content with trying to abridge our right to keep and bear guns. Oh, Alex, you're back here.
I am, yeah. Something happened with the phone again. So,
yeah, well, like I was telling my audience, it's probably some Common Core graduate is running the phone lines right now.
No kidding. You know, and you hit on a huge point there about losing our advances in our advantage in science and math and technology. And this is all going to end very poorly, and especially when you think about the amount of debt that the politicians have piled onto us. How do they think we're ever going to repay that with a nation of dumbed-down sheep who can't even think properly or read their Constitution or even their high school diploma, much less, you know, invent things and write proper software? We're in for some serious trouble here. And, you know, I'm really thankful that you're helping bring awareness to this. And obviously, you know a lot about it and you experience some of it firsthand. I'm a teacher as well, but I teach in a private school, so I have an advantage. But it's very easy to see who has come from a government school background and who has come from, you know, homeschool background or a proper private school. But really, it's going to end in absolute disaster if we don't start fixing this. And I really like your optimism, you know, about how they're going to fail with all this. But the behavioral psychology element that they've embedded throughout the schools now, I think is very alarming. And one more thing I want to hit on while we still have a little bit of time is where this is all going. It's actually not a secret. One of the things that I found while I was researching this is how amazingly open these people are with what they're doing with our schools. You have Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education that Obama appointed, bragging to UNESCO. He calls UNESCO his global partner, bragging to them that he's using the schools to create green global citizens and integrating the so-called science of sustainable development and global warming into every element of the curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade. And this is happening at the global level, and you have UNESCO bragging about these kinds of things too. For example, they're producing all these teaching manuals that are supposed to be used throughout the world. They don't want to teach phonics. They just kind of...
Looks like we lost our phone connection again. Yeah, there it is. All right. Well, I think this is an indicator of why we're in trouble. It isn't working. It isn't producing reliable infrastructure. It's certainly not working for the economy. And to respond to something Alex was saying about the politicians saying, how are we going to pay off the debt? Well, the politician's attitude is you got to come up with the money and you figure it out yourself, except that the new generation of Americans are incapable of figuring out anything, how to get new money, how to start new businesses. And we were reporting on just yesterday, despite the Bureau of Labor Statistics claim that small businesses are creating hundreds of thousands of jobs, since 2008, more small businesses have gone out of business in this country than have started. Entrepreneurial activity is at an all-time low. People can't come up with the next big idea. And he also touched on another topic close to my heart, and that is the quality of American software has deteriorated, and that's both a fault of the education system and the laws which say you can't sue software makers for bad product. And we've just become very, very tolerant of shoddy workmanship in car ignition keys, in computer software, in the computers themselves, and we're supposed to think this is acceptable. And maybe it's acceptable in a third world nation, but I would hope our political financial leadership has ambitions for the long-term future of our nation that are somewhat above third world poverty and squalor. But it does seem they're going that way, and it should remind us all that the goal of the New World Order is a few very, very rich people owning everything and the rest of the world basically living in the mud. Because, it's a funny thing about money junkies. They can't feel rich no matter how much they've actually got unless they can look around themselves and see poor people struggling to feed themselves and their children. That's what makes them feel that they're rich. Not the numbers on the bank statement, not the stocks they own, not the house they live in. They have to see other people suffering in poverty before they emotionally feel that they are rich. Because wealth is a relative measure. It's not an absolute. So anyway, it looks like we're not going to get Alex back for the rest of the show here, and I apologize for the phone issues. Apparently it's a problem with Time Warner. And again, the book is Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. And it's been a long, ongoing process. I did witness it myself when I was teaching at the high school level. And they want everybody to be an average, minimally educated person. And I don't know about you, but I don't want an average, minimally educated person flying the airplane I'm riding in or operating on me in the hospital or handling my business. I want the best minds I can get to make my business and my nation prosperous. And that's being taken away from us by a political financial structure that has grown so afraid of us that they literally need to paralyze our children's minds. Think Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where they went into all the little beakers with the embryos and put in alcohol to mentally cripple them. That is what our schools are doing. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and take my wife to lunch. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay angry. Make good choices. Aloha, America.